Need some help trying to find your way through a JavaScript code base or any code base? Well, I got some. Today we're going to be talking about getting around and navigating through code bases. Code bases can be really hard and complex to understand, especially when you're starting off. So I'm going to share with you guys some tips and tricks that I've learned along the way to help you guys navigate. If you've ever felt the same, like you're lost, you don't know what you're looking at, you've been searching through this code and you can't find what you're looking for, like this video, and if you have found any tips that you like, drop that down below in the comments. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe. Before we start, I do want to mention that although this video is titled JavaScript Codebase, this isn't just tips for navigating through JavaScript code bases. You can go ahead and apply these tips to any other project that you're looking for. I'm going to be using one of my old projects, and I'm going to link it in the bio so you guys can go ahead and get it directly from there and follow along for later. And what I want you guys to see is really not the code, not actually what's written or what it makes sense. Again, because remember, this isn't just for JavaScript. This is in general on how to get around code bases and how to understand it. So just don't worry about that too much and just concentrate on what I'm saying, and hopefully you'll be able to understand. So let's get to it. I got my glasses on, I got my hair up, and we're ready to go. The first one we're going to talk about are Readme files. Readme files are basically an instruction on how your project works. So most projects should have this. This file isn't mandatory, not everybody does it, but it's good housekeeping to do it. And what you can find in the Readme are instructions on how to set your project up. So it's kind of like when you buy something from IKEA or something you have to build and you kind of pull out the manual. So it's a manual. I should have just said that from the beginning. So the Readme is basically a manual that should have instructions on how to get started, how to put things together. Sometimes it won't be really helpful. It all depends on how well it was made or who wrote it. But it's a good place to start. It's a good place to start when you first open up a project, so you see all the tips or notes the person who has written this project has left for you. So that way you can get it ready out of the box. Let me go ahead and show you what a not so good one will be and a great one is. So we got our project open, the bookstore project. Again, it's on my GitHub. It's right here, I'll link it. So the bookstore is basically a website that you can see, kind of like a Barnes & Noble, your local bookstore, where you can search for books, browse for books, the basics. But it doesn't really matter what this project is about, because we're going to look at this project from a point of view of like, we're lost, we're confused, we didn't write this, so let's see how we get started. We're going to start with a Readme file. Again, this is opened in my code editor, VS Code specifically. If you guys want a video on code editors, let me know below in the comments. But anyways, we're going to get started. We're going to look at an okay example of what a Readme file is. So you're going to find your Readme file at the source of the project code. So when you go here to the side and you see kind of like a guide on what the project looks like with multiple folders, you're always going to find it on the most outer source, if there is one. And you're going to go ahead and click on it. So we're going to click on it, and it's going to look like this weird text, but this is kind of just formatting. So when it pops up on the actual repository, it looks prettier, but this is actually the code for it. So you'll find instructions, like we said, it's a manual. The manual will tell you, step 1, run this command and in both blah blah blah, and it will do this. Then find this here, and then you will see it running at here. So like I said, this is kind of an okay. I originally wrote this for myself, and along the way I've learned this is not a great way, because come a next person, someone like you, it's not really intuitive. Didn't really give you a lot of direction on what to do, but it's something, right? So let's look at something that actually will help us. But here you see it's kind of like a manual. So this is the back. So this Readme, this really nice thing, I wrote it myself. A few years later after I wrote this bookstore project. This is just an example of what a good Readme will look like. As you can see, there are a lot of points. It's kind of points about anything. So if we see the first one, kind of example, this is on how to get started, what you need to install on your computer, what the project you're going to use, what process you use for building, patterns in your coding styles are you going to use and follow. There are multiple things that can go on a Readme. I don't want to get too much into the details of this Readme because again, you won't find this on every Readme. Every Readme is really different. It's customizable based off what they want to let you know. So go find your Readme file and see what instructions they've left for you. See if you can find anything that will help you set up the project, that will help you navigate through it. And if not, I got point number. Okay, so number 2. This is definitely my favorite and my go-to that I always do when I start a new project. I look at the file structure. I look at how things are organized and I follow my way through. So we're going to look at the file structure. So in your editor, you can look towards the left or to the side, and you can see kind of like a little pyramid of files. And here you can see how things are organized, where things are stored, where all the code is, and what files, because things aren't just thrown around everywhere. They shouldn't be. They're in files and containers that show you where things should be. So in this one, we have a client and a server. So that should make some sense to you. If you don't know what a client and a server is, do not worry. We've all been there. Videos coming on what a client and a server is. So you can see that it's been divided into these 2 little packages. These 2 little folders. Then we also have something called Guitian, which we're not going to get into, not important right now. And then we also have something called package lock.json, which is particular to a JavaScript code or a JavaScript project, which is point number 3. But we'll get to that later. So let's look at the server code. Let's open up this file. The server code has other 3 photos called models, public, routes. Not sure. Routes sounds familiar. Routes sounds like something that routes and navigates between all your different files. So you're going to go through there, and then you're going to open up and see different files. And you can see, since it's a server code, you have routes that where your data goes to, where your requests come to get data. And here's all that code for that, and you can see their names here. So all the books, the authors, makes sense. Here are the routes for getting all books right, for ratings and all that code. And if we were to open up models, you can see what your models are. Again, if you don't know what a model is, don't worry, you will eventually. I can also get a video on that for you guys too. But for this case, we're just looking at how things are structured. So we have a models for our authors, our books, credit card, an index. What can an index be? Well, an index it kind of like groups all things together, so you can call it in one place. A lot of the times, index files are kind of used as the root, like the root of something, and a lot of things are kind of packaged together so that they can be used somewhere else. Let's take a look at the client code. Here's a quick trick that I love. If you're using VS Code, if you press and you're on a Mac, use Command and click. So click on whatever you want to see more of. So in this case, you want to see more of that. So if I do Command click, it opened it up for me and I didn't have to go look for it. So in app.js always looks extremely intimidating because it's kind of like the door that leads to the 500 other doors. In this case, this is a really small project, so it's not that big, but it's always going to be pretty intimidating. But do not worry, do not be intimidated. Best things to do is to just look at what is imported, so you can kind of see the other doors, right, or the other files and what they're named, and you can get a better idea. So we see on our app.js, we see that there's a home, there's a bestsellers, there's a nav bar, there's an about us, book details. So there's all these things that you are now aware of and are now in your project. So now we know that we have a bookstore, we We have models in our bookstores. We know the routes of our bookstores. And this client folder, specifically the app.js file, has told us that we have a nav bar. There's a file for the book details, the dashboard, and so it's kind of set up in this modular way where you can go and directly see, right? So let's give it a try. Let's see what dashboard is, right? So let's do my handy dandy trick of command click and we see dashboard. So again, do not worry on the code, right? It's going to look intimidating, but just browse through like in normal English, trying to read what's happening. So we know there's a dashboard. We have, it's called dashboard form. Let's not worry about this stuff, blah, blah, blah. Here, you can start to see that it makes some calls to get data, kind of like the ones that were in our server. If you see something called a function called render username, so we know that the dashboard has a username and needs to get the username. We know that there's something called render first name, render last name, render email. So it kind of looks like this dashboard shows all this user information, and we know through these functions that function names that can do something, but it gives us what we know what it's going to get, right? So it doesn't matter, again, doesn't matter what this code does if you don't understand it. You know that render phone number just means get a phone number. Same thing with email, right? And then we see that those functions are then called and then displayed at some point, right? Because we see our divs, we see our these libraries for forms, and we see an update button. So we kind of have more or less of a good idea, right? We can see how things are calling each other and working. That may have been a little bit daunting, but it's okay. Just want to wrap it up on how file structures help. So the file structure helps so that you can start to see how things are stored, what things do, what are the details, what is it made out of, where you can find things. Again, don't be intimidated by getting lost in what the actual code does and the lines and files and of files there are, and because it can get daunting. Just start to look in English, try to understand, because once you kind of start to get a bigger picture of what doors lead to what doors and what's inside of these doors or what files, code, you really get an understanding of how things start to work or what you're actually looking at. But if you don't, number 3 is looking at that package.json file. It may not be a .json, it may not be a named package.json, it may be something like gem file or something else. But it's basically a file that will have names of other dependencies in this project. What is a dependency? A dependency is basically another project that made by somebody else that you use in your code so that it makes things faster since it's already been done. For example, something like a form on the front end or on the client side. There's been forms done millions of times, so why would we have to waste time rewriting that code? You can just look for a form that's widely used, a package that's widely used, and use that package inside your project and reference it. So let's go take a look. So let's look at that package.json file right here. It's normally located at the root of your project. In this case, it's a little bit particular just because there are 2 different folder structures, so like your client and your server. So you may have different dependencies for each. Again, it's all based on how people prefer to structure their code. But you can always just do command P, which is on VS Code, and look for package.json. Or your gem file, just do the wide search, which is coming up soon. So do a wide search and look for the package.json. So we see there are 2 package.jsons. The package.json on the server and the client. So which means they're different packages for different sides of the codes we're using. So let's look at the package.json in the client. So we see the dependencies like I had mentioned before. We have a testing library, we have something called ant.d, we have something called Axio, something called Lodash, React, React DOM. There are hundreds and thousands of different types with different names. So what I like to do is Google them. because a lot of the times when I come to this file to try to understand what we're using or what they're using, I don't know them because there are so many of them. So I copy and I paste and I Google it and see what it does. So if I press here and I Google it, we're just going to type in. If I Google ant-d, I get a search for ant design, the world's most popular React UI. That seemed pretty. I saw React. It looks pretty. It was the first thing to come up, so it's a good source. Then I see something called NPM, right? NPM, I'll make another video on that, but NPM is basically where they're all stored, and it's kind of where you can see their ratings and what it is, and it kind of gives you an overall. I do want to mention here that NPM is only for JavaScript projects, hence the N in NPM for Node. So if we were to go and we see ant-d, we can see that it's a design, it has 500,000 weekly downloads, these are the licenses, which means it's pretty good, it's legit. And you can see what it does. It tells you how to install it, an example of it, it will tell you the links, so the home page, which is that first result that we found, and it kind of tells you how to use it. You have the documentation and search, and you can see how that code works. And hey, that means I don't have to write a button again, right? It does it out of the box, and you can go ahead and you see the code that it used, and you just copy and paste that code. There's definitely more detail about this, but do not worry about it. We're just trying to understand what we're using in this project. So we know that they're using something called ant-d for forms or for buttons, who knows. They're using something called Lodash, Axios, the list goes on and on. So take a look at this file and start to see what packages they're using. This way you can see, oh, they're using a date picker. So somewhere in the app, they're probably using a date picker. And I gotta go find it. So don't be intimidated, just go to the file and come look. Now, how do you go find things? That leads me to tip number 4, finding. So we are looking for wide search. Like I said, on VS Code, it's Command-Shift-F. There we go. Command-Shift-F on VS Code will give you, right up here on the side, a search. This will let you search, like I said, anywhere in the project. So if we search, we know it's a bookstore, right? Let's say I want to find things, everything that has to do with a book. I can just search book and see where everything is called book, right? So if I look for book, we have all the options. We have in the app.js file, we see book details and all the references to the book. We see something called a file called book card. We see something called book cover. We see pages of books. It really starts to give you like an idea of what's calling what and where can you find things. This is really helpful when you're looking for a certain thing that you must change, but you don't know where it is in the code. So you can just search for something specific. So let's say I wanted to change where the font size of our first name, right? Or where we're displaying it. But I have no clue where that could be. I just start typing first name, right? Because that sounds like a good keyword to look up where you would have something called first name. And well, look, we have register form and dashboard. Not really sure what those files do, right? But we do know there's something called first name. So we see that there's something here called first name, and it does this. Please input your first name. You find some direction. So we know that we're kind of getting somewhere to the first place, to the right place. So you just, and we go ahead and go look at another file, and we see that the first name is also in dashboard. So we might also change it there, right? And so this was a really easy way to find what I needed to find quickly. And this is endless. We can do last name, and we find searches for last name as well. We could, let's see, we wanted to find anywhere you could update or submit a form. Let's try searching the word update. Update may have not been a great word because there are other things in code and functions that are meant to update, but it's also great so you know whether you're updating values or your thing is updating. It's a really great tool to finding things that you know what you need to change but not familiar with. So this is a great tool to always have in your pocket. Was that helpful? Because that's all I got for now. To recap the tips, tip number 1 was look at the Readme file. Look at any instructions that the authors have written for you to get it working out of the box. Number 2, look at the file structure. Remember, this one's my favorite. I always use this one. The file structure helps you understand how things are organized, what leads to what. It helps you find other things that you maybe weren't looking for, and it really gives you an understanding of how things are sourced and where they live. Number 3, look at the package and the dependency file. This one helps you look at the third-party code they're using that may facilitate in the functionality of the application. And number 4, the wide search. The wide search is always a good one. Even after I've known the Codebase for years, I still wide search sometimes because things can get pretty big. And it's a great way to narrow things down and really find what you're looking for. If you have any tips or anything that you found has helped you, let me know. This is a community for all of us to try to learn. If you guys have any questions or you guys have any other topics you want me to cover, let me know below. I hope to see you guys next time. Make sure to hit that subscribe button so I can get you guys more videos. And I'll see you in the next advice session. Got my glasses on. These are not my glasses are over here. Tip number 3 is, I can't remember. This is a pretty small project. The code I have attached the